He never believed in that phenomenon called the light at the end of the tunnel, which appeared thanks to those rare cases when people who were on the verge of death woke up in a cold sweat and exclaimed, "I saw the light." But then he found himself in the same tunnel. And how did he die? The last thing he remembers is being alone in his room. He looked at the city from above, and then, when he lay down in bed, his body became impossibly heavy. Was he poisoned? Killed? Gray thought about it. A lot of people wanted him dead. After all, he was a king. But no matter how much he wants to find out the cause of his death, nothing can be done about it. The first thing he heard was, "Congratulations, you have a healthy baby boy." He vaguely distinguished male and female silhouettes. Has he really just been born? Finally his vision returned and he saw a happy man and woman. He understood what they were saying. It was a good sign. The woman's tender and bright smile radiated maternal love. The woman was beautiful and charming, and the man standing next to him with a strong jaw and eyebrows, pointed like a sword, will be a strict and serious father. The surroundings seemed normal to Gray, but where was he? Weeks passed slowly after weeks. Despite her gentleness and kindness, Mother Alice firmly held the reins of power in the house. And if you ignore the occasional childish antics, his father Reynolds was a reliable and charismatic man. And although Gray was grateful to be born into a loving family, his life was full of difficulties, minimal control of your limbs, and the inability to control body functions. Only mental fortitude, honed during the times when Gray was king and representative of his country, as well as the faint hope that it was all a dream, were the only things that kept him sane. It seemed as if he had traveled back in time to a much more archaic period. It was common for these people to carry weapons. Instead of medicine, dubious elixirs were sold. The mother bought 3 for her husband. Gray really wanted to return home, to his world. In a previous life he was a king. He led armies and defeated representatives of countries from all over the world. But despite all his achievements, he has never been proud of himself as he is now. He learned to crawl. The parents carefully watched so that their son did not hit his head on the corner and did not let him near the shelf. He crawled to the mirror to look at himself. Mom was glad that her son Art was so inquisitive. Several months have passed, and Gray could not get used to his new name. Art is too cute a name for a former king, but he has to admit, he's absolutely adorable. All ladies should prepare to have their hearts broken. Alice put her son to sleep in his crib, kissed him goodnight and wished him sweet dreams. As soon as she left and closed the nursery door, Art climbed out of the crib. He had about an hour before Alice came to check on him sleeping. He crawled forward. His goal was close. He crawled into his parents' library, and he reached for the books. Since he discovered this place, he has been sneaking here every night to learn more about this world. The continent of Dicketon, where he was born, is divided into 3 main kingdoms. Elanor is an elven kingdom hidden deep in the forest. Darv, a huge underground kingdom home of the dwarves. And Sapin, the human kingdom, is undoubtedly the most populous area. Like Gray's previous world, there is also a monarchy present here. Only the presto here is not inherited, but depending on merit. Art learned that this world is much less developed than his previous world, and he realized that the reason for the lack of technological progress was magic. Art became interested in books about magic. In his old world, there was a life force, chi, which after training people could use to strengthen the body or weapons. There is a power in this world, mana. Unlike ki, it exists not only inside a person, but also in the environment. The ability to control mana is genetic. 1 in 100 children has it. Mana is used to strengthen the body and cast spells. Enhancers strengthen their bodies with mana, giving them incredible strength and agility. However, their weakness lies in their limited attack range. Spellcasters emit mana into the outside world, allowing them to bend the environment to their will. However, they need to infuse their own mana core with mana from the outside world in order to cast the spell. Art's mother Alice was a deviant, or rather an emitter. She was a rare type of magician who was able to use unique restorative mana. Art had read in books that the first awakening of sorcerers occurs between early and late adolescence, when their mana core manifests itself. In the past world, children were taught to meditate to form a ki center. Art decided to meditate to collect mana within himself. The tricks from my past life worked. Art felt a small fire light up inside him. At this time, the mother found her son and interrupted his studies. He's indignant that he was interrupted. Art soiled his diaper, which ruined his mood even more. Alice often kept a diary in which she recorded all the important events in her son's life. More than 2 years had passed, and she felt that every day she was learning more about her child. And she came to the conclusion that Arthur must be the most charming child. He has beautiful brown hair and azure eyes that look quite reasonable. But she realized that if she was not a strict and reliable mother, Arthur may have trouble in the future. She could not rely on her husband, He was even more of a child than Arthur himself. She barely stopped him when he tried to teach their child to fight when he had just learned to crawl. Alice noticed one thing. Arthur loves to walk among the small merchants who stop in the center of Ashbear. Therefore, instead of buying groceries once a week, they go to the city center every other day. Arthur is a very curious boy. He is attracted to everything unusual. Arthur stood at the window and looked out onto the street. He watched his father. About 2 years have passed since the boy began the difficult path of study. He watched Ray mumble something for a few minutes and concentrate very hard. The stone lying on the ground began to rise. Ray was tense and seemed to be doing hard work. Finally, he threw his hands up, and at the same time stones and earth flew into the air. Arthur was very surprised by what he saw. Ray stood in the middle of the yard, and fragments of stones flew around him. He turned towards the house, saw that his son was looking at him, and shouted that Arthur's dad was shaking. Arthur thought that it wasn't worth concentrating extremely hard for 3 minutes to throw something that could be thrown with your hands with less effort. Alice came up and patted her son on the head. He watched his dad so sweetly. Arthur knew his father was an amplifier. I wonder what Arthur himself will become when his mana core awakens. At this time, the father continued his exercises about the yard, which caused considerable damage to the garden. He tore up a large section of the lawn to remove one fallen leaf. Arthur became uninterested in watching his father's classes and crawled onto the floor. The mother decided that her son was tired and wanted to sleep. She took him in her arms and kissed him tenderly. She carried him to his crib, even though he really wanted to go to the library. Mom promised that he would definitely go there later. Arthur realized that he had no chance. He made the cutest face and asked his mother for books. Such a radiance emanated from him that Alice could not resist her son's request. No matter how much she resisted, she still allowed him to play with books in the office. She reproached herself for being a bad mother, and Arthur thought that his behavior was not humiliating. Just that a great warrior should use all the weapons in his arsenal. Alice watched with emotion as her son turned the pages of the book. At this time, a roar was heard from the yard, and Alice went to find out if her husband had cut down another tree in the garden. Arthur's greatest achievement, besides the accumulated knowledge of this world, was that he had made progress in forming a mana core. He spent 2 years moving tens of thousands of tiny fragments of mana and collecting them in the solar plexus area. And he understood why this process should only be completed by his adolescence. This is a very difficult task for his body and mind, but these 2 years were not in vain. He's almost finished forming the core. He only had one small piece left. Alice and Roy were in the yard when a powerful explosion was heard in the house. The swarm shielded Alice from the fire and debris flying at them. A fiery avalanche covered the husband and wife. When everything calmed down, the couple began to come to their senses. Roy asked if his wife was okay, but she could only repeat the name of her son, who was in the house. She tore herself out of her husband's arms and sobbed in despair. Her son was there, at the epicenter of the explosion. Roy rushed to the destroyed house. He pushed back the broken door. He stopped in confusion. He could not believe his eyes. And at that very moment, he burst out laughing. Alice ran into the house after her husband and asked what was wrong with her son. Ray said it was incredible. The boy was not yet 3 years old. Mother and father watched as Arthur, completely unharmed, floated in the air in the middle of the destroyed room. The boy got to his feet and walked. He felt great. This is what it's like to have a core of mana in you. Even the trees became greener. At this time, he did not understand why. Without leaving the house, he sees trees, and he noticed the completely destroyed house. Were they attacked? Who dared to destroy the king's house? Aside from rebuilding their home, a lot has happened in the past year. Arthur learned to write and count with Alice, studied the basics of manipulation and increasing mana. He and his father learned basic body training while Arthur was too young to spar. Push-ups were difficult for the boy. On his 3rd birthday, his father gave him a wooden sword so that his son could practice. It's time for sword training. Arthur was reading a book at the time and didn't want to interrupt, but there was nothing to do. They went out into the yard and Ray asked his son to remember everything he taught him. You need to combine the flow of mana with breathing. The nucleus is an organ just like the heart or lungs. Ray crouched down and invited his son to begin the attack. Arthur got into a fighting stance, and he attacked his father, trying to strike him with a sword. He had to try to cut the branch that his father was holding in his hands. Arthur threw blows, but none hit the target. Finally, the boy got angry. He realized that Dad wouldn't let him rest until he did what he needed to do. He concentrated and was enveloped in a faint light. With one lightning strike, he cut the branch, much to Ray's surprise. After which his dad allowed him to go into the office, where Arthur began meditation exercises. In this world, strength is measured by the color of the mana core. Initially, the mana core is formed in black, then red, then orange, yellow, silver, and white. Each stage is divided into 3 shades: Dark, solid, and light. Arthur was thinking about how he could quickly improve his mana when at that time he was called to dinner. The boy was very unhappy that he could not be alone and concentrate. Ray was very thoughtful at dinner, and finally he told Alice that Arthur needed to find a real mentor. Alice was furious. The child is only 4 years old. In addition, Ray said that he himself could teach him everything. But Ray never thought that their son would be such a prodigy and be able to manipulate mana at 4 years old. His father only restrains him, but the boy has great potential. Alice could not allow the child to leave home for some city hundreds of miles away. Ray objected that Cyrus was not just some city and his friend lived there and would take care of Arthur. The quarrel between the parents grew stronger. Arthur silently listened to their screams. Finally, Roy turned to his son with a question. Does he want to go to another city and have a real teacher? Arthur wondered, isn't it too difficult a decision for a 4-year-old to make? He asked if Mom and Dad could meet the teacher with him. The parents stared at each other and fell silent. Arthur didn't understand. Was his proposal really that complicated? The parents burst out laughing. It never occurred to them that they could all go together. Alice was sure that Arthur would be better off if she was with him when he had his exams. Roy said that of course they were all going to Cyrus City. Arthur's parents were already preparing for a 3-week trip. Finally, the evening arrived on the eve of departure. Mom sent Arthur to bed early. She tucked her son into bed and told him that their old friends from Twin Horns were coming with them. They need Cyrus too. Arthur knew the Twin Horns had been in the area for some time. They even helped restore their house when they had time. This group consisted of 2 magicians with 3 amplifiers. They will help with any difficulties, and Arthur will finally leave this small town. It's time to see what this world can throw at him. In the morning, the whole family left the house. They met their friends on the road. Arthur's father greeted his friends warmly, and he introduced them to his son. Arthur politely introduced himself and thanked his father's friends for their help. Adam Crench, an amplifier with a spear specialty, crouched down and patted the boy on the head. Angela Ross, a magician with a specialty in wind magic, took the boy in her arms and noted that he was very similar to his mother. Durden Walker, a mage with a specialty in earth magic, picked the boy up in his arms. Only Jasmine Flamesworth, a magician with a specialty in double daggers, did not take part in the general fun. She stood with her eyes downcast. Helen Shard, a mage specializing in magic bows, told Arthur that Jasmine needed to get used to them all, and that Arthur should not pay attention to her. She shook the boy's hand firmly. Finally, everything was ready for the trip, and 2 carts drawn by lizards set off on the road. Arthur looked at the retreating house. The journey has begun. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was very interested. Night came and it was necessary to look for revenge for a halt. Suddenly their squad was attacked by wolves, but Jasmine and Helen along with Roy quickly dealt with them. Jasmine deftly wielded her daggers, and Helen was an excellent archer. Roy fought with his bare hands. Alice was stunned when she saw her husband carrying 2 wolves. Tired Arthur sat by the fire and looked at the flames. Helen encouraged him that this was his first ever trip. Arthur gloomily thought that in this life, yes. The girl asked him if his father really said that Arthur was a brilliant magician. Did he really awaken a year ago? Adam decided that he needed to stretch a little before going to bed and asked Ray if he didn't mind. He would practice with his son. Ray allowed, but asked Adam to be careful with the child. They had just started training. Arthur was unhappy, but no one asked him, and Adam took the boy with him. Alice was worried how her son would bear such a load. Adam turned to the boy, grinned widely, and asked if he was ready. Arthur saluted him with his wooden sword. Adam assumed a fighting stance and asked if the genius child knew how to strengthen his weapon. He wanted to attack the boy, and Arthur saw his totem animal, a tiger baring its teeth. The boy tried to hint to his parents that their child was in danger, but they watched the fight with a smile, and the father wished his son victory. Arthur realized that Dad was useless, stood up with a sword, and King Gray stood behind him. His mana glowed brightly. He made a sharp jerk and rushed to the attack. Adam was waiting for him, clutching a stick in his hands. Arthur made a sharp lunge, but Adam blocked and the blow did not reach the target. Arthur was very angry with his child body, which did not give him the opportunity to fight. He rushed at Adam with all his might and almost knocked him to the ground. Adam blocked his attack with his foot, and he wanted to give the boy a kick, which he dodged. Adam realized that his opponent was serious and prepared for the attack in earnest. Arthur dealt a crushing blow to his enemy, and at that moment the boy remembered Newton's third law. Every action has a reaction. From Adam's retaliatory strike, he flew far back, dropping his wooden sword. Alice was horrified. When I saw my son lying on the ground far from the sparring site, Durden slapped Adam on the head for hitting the child so hard. Adam asked Ray what kind of hellish training did he use to create such a monster out of his son. Ray answered honestly that he did not teach his son this. Alice did not believe her husband and scolded him while she was treating Arthur. Arthur admitted that he read books and learned. "Well, I watched my dad." The entire group of magicians gathered around Arthur and Adam asked the boy to teach them the technique of some movements. Several days have passed since Arthur and the group began their journey to the city of Cyrus. They stopped near the lake and everyone started swimming. During this time, Arthur's birthday passed. Jasmine gave him a gift for his birthday, a knife, and wanted to get a lesson in new techniques. Adam enjoyed swimming in the lake. Durden watched him. Suddenly he flew towards Adam from the kick that Ray gave him. Everyone really enjoyed having such fun. To Arthur's surprise, Jasmine quickly understood his instructions and excelled at learning feints. Finally, they left the beautiful place. It was time to continue the journey. On the way, Adam told the boy how his father in the past constantly got everyone into all sorts of troubles. Alice was not happy, and Arthur was worried if she was okay. Mom replied that she was just tired. Arthur left his mother alone and sat down to read. His reading was interrupted by Jasmine, who wanted the boy to teach her more. At this time, the cart began to shake. They were attacked by bandits. Everyone prepared for the attack. Angela summoned the powers of the wind to repel the attack of the bandits. Alice covered her son with herself so that he would not get hurt. Arrows whistled in the air. There was an explosion, and everything was swept away by the shockwave. Jasmine threw the knife at the bandits. Ray caught and broke an arrow flying at him. Durden gripped his staff tightly. Adam prepared to hit his opponents with his spear. Helen was wounded in the leg by an arrow, but was not going to give up. She aimed her bow at the bandits surrounding them. Arthur and his mother looked at what was happening from the cart, and they saw that they were completely surrounded by unfamiliar, dangerous people. They were at the top, which made their position very advantageous. The archers aimed their weapons at the two carts. Bandits crawled towards the travelers from the tall grass. A battle axe stuck into the ground. The leader of the bandits ordered that only women and a child be left alive. He was glad that they had an excellent catch today. The main thing is not to damage the new living product. They'll pay well for it. Arthur had already forgotten that every world has its share of dirt. The boy realized that he would be undamaged goods. He grabbed his sword and glared at the bandits. Mom hugged him, pressed him to her, and asked her son not to worry. She was next to him. One of the bandits fired an arrow at the squad. Durden and Ray rushed to the defense of the boy and Alice. They raised the earth and built an earthen wall to protect them from arrows. The wall separated the bandits and the travelers' wagons. Angela drove the arrows away from the van with her wind magic. The bandit leader and his henchmen began to descend. Ray successfully defended himself from their attack. Blow after blow flew and they all hit the target. Some bandits got scared. Having pinned two enemies to the ground, Ray did not notice how a bandit with a saber appeared above him. He intended to finish the guy off with one blow, but the arrow pierced the bandit in the chest, and he did not have time to finish his plan. Helen prepared for the next shot. Jasmine beat her opponents with knives, causing them to become bloody and no longer pose a threat. Adam successfully defended himself against 3 attackers and caused them considerable damage. The huge robber tried to stop Adam with an axe blow, but the guy deftly dodged and the axe crashed into the ground. At the same moment, Adam turned around and attacked the enemy. His spear hit the giant in the chin and left him no chance. Jasmine, like a wild cat, attacked her opponents and dealt them fatal blows. Hooking her legs around the neck of one bandit, she threw him to the ground, while simultaneously stabbing the second one with a knife. One of the attackers decided to knock her down with a whip, but the girl turned over in the air and dodged the blow. The bandit with the whip demanded that she stop resisting, but Jasmine was not going to do it. She made several feint jumps and dodged the blow. Arthur saw that Jasmine was at a disadvantage compared to the opponent. But can Arthur help her? There is only one fighter. But does a small child have a chance against an adult fighter? At this time, a man crashed into the cart and it began to tremble. One wall was cracked. A bloody Ray looked at Alice and Arthur. The leader of the bandits was coming straight at Ray from above, with the goal of finishing him off. He clutched a saber in his hands. Arthur screamed for Mom to heal Dad quickly. But there was clearly something wrong with Alice. She stammered and said she couldn't do it. Arthur couldn't understand why she said that. Ray rushed to reassure his wife and said that everything was fine. His injuries were not life-threatening. Don't let her worry, she's still the best. He turned to his son and asked him to listen carefully to what his father was about to tell him. Ray said that he could fight the bandits and defeat the leader if he didn't have to protect the two of them. Therefore, Arthur must take his mother along the path along which they came here. They need to go now and not stop. Arthur shouted that he would not leave his father. The father himself saw that his son could fight. Ray replied that he knows that his son is a brave warrior, so he trusts him with the most precious thing, the protection of his mother. And most importantly, Arthur needs to protect the child who has not yet been born. Arthur realized that his mother was pregnant. Because of this, she slept so much and seemed tired all the time. Ray was going to tell his eldest son everything when they got to Cyrus, but circumstances have developed such that now he knows everything. Ray grabbed his son by the shoulder, and Arthur promised that he would protect his mother. Alice tried a healing spell. Ray told Arthur to get ready. The leader of the bandits saw that the people they attacked had a healer and demanded that she be caught. Arthur grabbed his mother's hand and pulled her to run. In parting, he shouted to his father not to die. Adam undertook to cover the escape of Alice and the child. One of the bandits rushed to detain the healer, but his path was blocked by Adam with a spear. He shouted that he would stop the attacker. Alice and the boy ran away a considerable distance, but someone took aim at them with a bow. Arthur heard the whistle of a flying arrow. He turned around and placed his sword in her path. He shot down the arrow and it did not reach Alice. He managed to deflect a few more arrows, but one of them split his wooden sword and it became useless. The archer was amazed how the kid did it. He took the next arrow from his quiver, but at the same moment he himself was shot. Helen prepared for the next shot and screamed at Arthur not to stop, but to keep running. Arthur and his mother ran as fast as they could. Still running, Arthur thought something was wrong. There were 4 magicians with the bandits. Angela dealt with one using wind magic. Adam fought with the second and pressed him hard. Ray grappled with the third and did not allow him to move, and the fourth was nowhere to be found. The bandit leader looked up and shouted at the magician to forget about the plan and just kill the fugitives. Arthur looked up and saw that the water from the lake had risen. There was a magician on the mountain who was folding water into a huge ball, and he threw this ball at the running Alice and Arthur. The boy realized that even if he could dodge with the help of mana, Alice would not have time to do this. Then he jumped up and forcefully pushed his mother away from the ball, and he himself flew towards him. He knew that his plan might not work, but he really wanted to destroy the magician. He pulled out a knife and tied it with a mana string, throwing it straight towards the magician through the water ball. The knife plunged into the leg of the unsuspecting magician. Arthur held the mana string tightly and pulled on it. He really hoped that this string would hold up. The magician found himself tied to the boy's mana string and could not escape. Arthur began to pull the string. The magician could not do anything with the power of the boy's mana and fell from the mountain. In desperation, he tried to grab the edge, but nothing could help him, and he fell down with a desperate cry. The boy also began to fall from the mountain. Durden used his magic to catch the child, but the hand he created from the earth no longer had time to come to the rescue. Arthur fell with the thought that now everyone else would be okay. He only regretted that he would no longer have to be an older brother. The boy woke up in the forest and for a long time could not understand where he was. He couldn't believe he was still alive. Next to him lay the body of a bandit magician with a knife in his leg. Near the body was a flask of water and a bag of supplies. The boy reached for water and food. He ate and drank although he felt neither hunger nor thirst, but it was necessary. Then he fell exhausted again on the grass and lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a blue sky and birds above him. With great effort, he collected his mana in the solar plexus area, and with difficulty he rose to his feet. He was covered all over with abrasions and scratches. The boy approached the bandit's body and pulled his knife out of his leg. Then he looked up. The mountain towered above him and went into the sky. Arthur couldn't believe that he had fallen from such a height and survived. He didn't know how much time had passed or where he was. But it didn't matter. He needed to move on. At this time, a voice came out of nowhere, glad that Arthur had woken up. The boy froze in place. He hid behind a tree and looked towards the dead man. He approached him cautiously, fearing that it was he who spoke. But the voice said that no one would come to life if the boy was afraid of it. Arthur took a breath, but immediately thought that he could not trust this unknown voice, no matter how silky, smooth, and dignified it sounded. He pointed his knife into the bushes and asked who was talking to him. The one who saved him. A hare jumped out of the bushes and disappeared into the forest. The voice replied that he would know the answer to the first question as soon as he arrived at his house. Arthur didn't think he would rush to look for the owner of the voice. Then the voice said that he was the only one who could bring Arthur home from this place. Arthur remembered Alice, Ray, and everyone else. He needed to know if they were okay. Did they get to Cyrus safely? He politely called the gentleman's voice and asked him to honor him with his presence. A loud laugh was heard from the depths of the forest, which scared the birds from the trees. The voice was glad that Arthur Lewis grasped everything so quickly, but it was still not worth calling the Lady Master. Arthur wondered how the voice knew his name, and the woman said that she would show him everything. He saw his fall from the mountain, very long and dangerous, and how he smoothly fell down as if someone was supporting him. The voice advised the boy to immediately go through the forest while it was still light. As Arthur's condition improved, he couldn't help but think, what magic did the woman use to save him from falling? How could she know that she and the bandit were falling, and why did she save only Arthur? He heard some rustling and rushed towards the sound. His hopes were justified. There was a river in front of him. The boy immediately rushed to swim. He happily splashed in the water for a long time. And then I washed my things. The voice said with affection that it was nice to look at the carefree boy. Arthur didn't expect to be watched. The voice said that the boy had nothing to look at, nothing to be ashamed of. Arthur felt shy and quickly got dressed. The voice asked for forgiveness for scaring Arthur and asked him not to sulk. Arthur muttered that he simply had an undeveloped body. He filled his flask with water from the river. The mountain was in the east, which means he must be near the region of the elves. But the forest of Elshire was famous for its fogs, and here the air was clean and clear. His fears of traveling through the animal glades were calmed. It seemed that only small animals lived here. Although Arthur was surprised that he did not see a single beast with mana. Although mana was poured into the air, he wished he could stop and devour her. He needed to hurry. He needed to return to his parents as quickly as possible. His mother was pregnant, and the stress from Arthur's death could threaten his second child. Of course, the boy hoped that all his close people were still alive. It was already getting dark when he approached a mountain of stones, from where a voice said that she was glad that the boy was able to get here safe and sound. Arthur poked the stones with a stick and said that he was glad to meet you. The voice replied that she was not a sentient accumulation of stones. The boy will find her in the crevice. Arthur saw an opening that was glowing softly. He fearlessly stepped there with the thought that he hoped to see his mom and dad soon. Arthur was climbing over the rocks when a voice advised him to watch his step, but the boy still fell and flew down. He flew headfirst towards a bright spot shining with blue light at the bottom of the crevasse. He screamed loudly and fell to the ground for the second time in a short time. Arthur rose to his feet and thought that he could have been warned about the fall from the height of the second floor. He looked around, and what he saw knocked him off his feet in surprise. The boy could not understand what he saw in front of him. It was a huge black figure with eyes burning with red fire and horns on its head. She was terrifying. The monster looked at him with its terrible eyes and said that they have finally met, child. She stood up from her seat and walked towards Arthur. The boy noticed that she was wearing black armor. The boy realized that the end had come for him. He could not move from fear. The monster told the boy that if he opened his mouth so wide, bugs would fly into him. And he extended his hand to Arthur. Arthur closed his mouth tighter just in case. The creature leaned over the child and stretched out her hands to him, wrapped in power. Arthur noticed a deep wound in the monster's side. She said it would take her time to open a dimensional rift strong enough to bring the boy home. Arthur took the hand extended towards him. The creature showed Arthur special plants that would prevent them from starving to death until she could cope with the rift. Arthur politely thanked the hostess. He walked up to the berry he liked and picked it. He had never seen such large berries before. Suddenly his face was reflected in the berry, and then he saw his father and mother laughing with a little girl. The owner of this place quietly came up from behind and recommended another berry that tasted better. Arthur jumped in surprise. Later, he and the creature sat on the rocks and had dinner. Arthur plucked up courage and said that he knew that his mistress was a lady. But how can he contact her? She replied that her name was Sylvia. Arthur asked if he could ask her some questions. Sylvia allowed, but was not sure that she could answer everything. The boy was no longer afraid of Sylvia. He asked where this place is. Why is she sitting here alone? Where did she come from and how did she get this wound? And why did she save him? This place is a narrow zone that lies between the animal glades and Eleanor's forest. No one knows about this place because Sylvia protected it from everyone who came near. Arthur is the first to enter here. The boy said that his close people call him Art, and he wants Sylvia to call him that too. Sylvia agreed. She is here alone because she has no one to be with. She has many enemies who desperately want what she has. This wound was inflicted on her in her last battle with her enemies before she could escape, and she saved Art for many reasons. She was touched by his courage of self-sacrifice. Besides, she felt lonely. Night has come. Sylvia had to treat her wound, which was festering, so that she would be in good condition when she worked on the dimensional rift tomorrow. She went to bed. As the scary figure clad in dark armor walked away, Arthur couldn't help but think how lonely she looked. Before she left, Sylvia told the boy that although her vision could not reach where they were going, his family and friends were safe. Arthur was happy to hear this and thanked Sylvia from the bottom of his heart. A huge weight lifted from his heart. When Sylvia wasn't preparing the portal, she and Arthur spent hours talking about various things. Those hours turned into days and days into weeks as they spent every moment in each other's company. And although Sylvia never spoke about herself, Arthur began to understand what kind of personality this mysterious creature was. Arthur meditated in silence and thought. Sylvia was the living embodiment of the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Despite her appearance, she was kind, gentle, patient, and warm. She took care of the boy and brought him the most delicious fruits. She reminded Arthur of his mother, in that she was also gentle and kind, but she scolded him greatly when he made mistakes. Arthur remembered something unpleasant. He expressed his hatred for the bandits who attacked them. They deserved to die and worse. The boy was going to track down those bandits who were alive and take revenge. At this, Sylvia flicked him on the forehead and he flew back. He got very angry and didn't understand what it was. She said that maybe Art was wrong, that the bandits deserved to die. It was for this reason that she did not save the life of the magician with whom the boy fell. Allowing your heart to be clouded by hatred and revenge will only hurt yourself. Instead, you need to continue to live and move forward proudly. On his way, Art will encounter many troubles, but he must not let grief and anger eat away at his mind. A boy must learn from others and look to the future with a smile. Only then will he truly win. After these words, Sylvia stroked Art's forehead and asked if she had flicked him too much. Is he still in pain? A lecture on morality and life, from a figure who seemed to be the embodiment of evil, greatly affected Arthur. He was worried that Sylvia's wound was getting worse, but Sylvia reassured him that she was fine. She asked him what she knew, that people form a core and wake up at the age of 12 to 13. How did Art manage to form a core and use more effective techniques than many full-fledged magicians? Art replied that his parents thought he was a genius. Sylvia rose to her feet and said that if that were the case, Art could learn something. Namely, absorbing mana while moving and possibly during combat, if the boy is good enough. Art was surprised. How could Sylvia manage to do this? Humans have a very linear mindset when it comes to mana. Let Art just start with small mindless movements and work his way up from there. This was easier said than done. Sylvia replied that mana beasts learn to do this naturally, but humans wake up later and their tetas are not able to multitask. But waking up late is not Art's thing, so if he trains hard, he will succeed. Arthur promised that he would do his best. After this conversation, they began training. They were given to the boy with great difficulty. He kept falling. Mastering this skill to its fullest meant being able to fight effectively while maintaining a steady internal flow of mana. And after some time, Art, training with a stick, realized that he had achieved his goal. He called Sylvia to rejoice with him, but instead of answering, he heard the sound of a blow. It was Sylvia who fell to the ground, and a pool of blood spread under her. Arthur rushed as fast as he could to his girlfriend. There was so much blood that Arthur stepped into it with his feet. He raised his head and screamed loudly in despair. Why did her condition worsen so suddenly? What's happened? He saw a brightly sparkling, ready-made portal above him, and I realized what happened. This is very unfair. Sylvia maintains the portal and has no strength left to heal herself. She is getting worse and worse. She did everything to save him. Arthur felt his eyes fill with tears. Sylvia woke up and said that Arthur shouldn't worry. Everything is fine. The boy burst into tears. How can everything be okay when his kind and gentle Sylvia is in such a state? She dies because of him. He cried for a long time and could not calm down. Sylvia understood that they did not have much time left together, and she wanted Art not to blame himself for this. Arthur couldn't help but blame himself. After all, Sylvia sacrificed herself so that he could meet his family. Sylvia believed that the boy was doing her a favor by allowing her to leave this cave a little earlier. She said that her name does not fit the image in which she now resides. A bright light enveloped her, and her body began to disintegrate. Like a stone shell, it fell down and a new body appeared under it. Right in front of the surprised Arthur stood a beautiful white dragon with swan wings. The dragoness looked tenderly at the boy and asked with a smile, "Is she now more like Sylvia?" Arthur couldn't believe his eyes. His Sylvia turns out to be a dragon. Sylvia believed that she was what humans called a dragon, but they had very little time to talk about such nonsense now that she was in this form. She must use her original form to complete the portal. But now that her disguise is gone, they will soon come for her. Art didn't understand who was coming. Sylvia approached the portal, and it lit up with all the colors of the rainbow. It was so bright that Arthur covered his eyes from the blinding light. Sylvia asked Art to listen to her very carefully. There are a couple of things she needs to tell him before they break up. A large rainbow egg appeared in front of Arthur. The boy took it. It was not heavy, but the boy felt that he could barely hold it. Sylvia pulled out a snow-white feather from her wing, and she gave it to Art so that he could wrap the egg. This will hide his aura, and she asked the boy to be patient a little. She nuzzled his stomach. Writing flashed on Arthur's body, and he screamed in pain and fear. He struggled to catch his breath, and Sylvia said it would show itself as time passed. And now she will open the portal. She didn't have time to choose the exact location, but Arthur and her parents must be somewhere close to each other. There was a crash from above, and stones flew down. Arthur raised his head to see what was happening. Sylvia protected the boy from the falling stones with her wings. He held the feather-wrapped egg tightly in his hands. Someone from above ordered Lady Sylvia to stop being stubborn and give away what she had. A figure similar to Sylvia before her change said that if Sylvia gave everything, then her wound could be healed. She had already caused a lot of trouble after hiding here. Sylvia flew into the air, and the figure disappeared in the reflections of the white light. She admitted to Arthur that she had deliberately delayed the construction of the portal in order to spend more time with him. She has one last selfish request. Can Art call her grandma? The boy grabbed onto Sylvia's wing and began to ask her to go into the portal with him. They can hide. Sylvia began to cry. She couldn't do it. The boy felt himself being pulled into the opened portal. He reached out to his girlfriend in desperation, and he shouted with all his might, "Don't leave me, Grandma." Sylvia heard him and shed tears. Arthur heard Sylvia's last words. "Thank you, my child." Arthur flew through the sparkling lights. The flight was long. Finally, he saw the treetops above him. He understood that Sylvia was gone, and he would never have a chance to see her again. Tears choked him. Memories of the 4 months spent with Sylvia swirled in my head. Sylvia treated him like family, and taught him everything that Arthur had lacked since he came into this world. He was lying on the ground and sad, when suddenly Sylvia's voice interrupted his thoughts. Arthur jumped up, not believing what was happening. The voice continued to say that if Art was listening to this now, then she had shown him the real her. Arthur remembered how Sylvia nuzzled his stomach. This means that it was at this time that she conveyed her message. He began to listen to what Sylvia wanted to tell him. She continued that Arthur was not ready for the whole truth. His body is that of a boy who is barely 4 years old. Although his mana core has already reached the dark red stage, he is not yet strong enough. As a small parting gift, she put her unique gift into it. His future development as a magician will depend on how well he can use her gift. Arthur thought that he had not asked for any gifts. He would prefer to see Sylvia alive. The voice continued that it understood that Art felt sadness, anger, and guilt, but he had a family to take care of and a purpose to fulfill in life. Her wish for him is for him to embrace the joy and innocence of childhood and become a man she and his parents can be proud of. When his mana core turns white, he will hear Sylvia again. Then she will explain everything. Arthur reached for Sylvia's gift, but her parting words made him numb. She said goodbye to King Grey. Arthur was tormented by questions for a long time. How long did Sylvia know his identity? How did she even know about this? One thing was clear to him. If he focused on revenge, this life would be no different from the last. He can move forward now, but first it would be good to understand where he is. Artru broke out of his dream and ran with all his might. He ran to a tall tree and climbed it. When he got to the top, he looked around. Even with mana, his vision was limited, but he now knew for sure that he was in the depths of the Elshire forest. He began to jump from one tree to another. Here, he could hardly use the mana rotation that Sylvia had taught him, although he could already use magic for much longer. But he wondered how he got here. Sylvia said he would be around other people. There were no people nearby, and Arthur decided to continue looking around. Moving through the trees, Arthur finally saw a lone cart below. He began to hope that these people would be able to take him with them. He was about to jump down, but a strange feeling made him stop. Some people were standing near the cart. Arthur listened and heard a woman's cry for help and a demand to shut up the screaming mouth. The men below were talking about how they needed to prepare to leave. Only a few days separated them from this damned forest. One of the men tied the girl up and told the boss that many people love elves, so she could be sold at a high price. Arthur realized that these were slave traders. In the arms of one of the bandits, he saw an elven girl who had lost consciousness. The bandits hurried each other and were in a hurry to get on their way. Art had no idea how those pigs got their hands on the forest hounds, but pulling one would be his ticket out of these woods. And on these slave traders, the boy could let off steam, considering what happened to him during this time. Dealing with these bandits will be the best solution. And Arthur continued to follow the cart through the trees. The robbers did not notice that they were being watched from above. Arthur did not strike immediately. Attacking all four would be suicide for him. He decided to wait, gain strength, and strike at the most opportune moment. Finally, the moment came. At night, when the bandits stopped for a rest, Arthur picked a nut from a tree, and he threw it at the dogs that were pulling the cart. The dogs started barking deafeningly, and the bandits hastened to shut them up before they woke up everyone in the forest. Without a weapon, Arthur was forced to use techniques from his past life. He wasn't sure it would work in this world. A glow of power enveloped his hand. The bandit below the boy was feeding the horned dogs meat to keep them quiet. Arthur jumped from the tree and attacked the robber very unexpectedly. He kicked him in the body and reached for his neck with his hand full of energy. A huge wound appeared on the bandit's neck. Arthur held his enemy by his clothes, and he silently fell to the ground. Arthur took the knife from the bandit. The boy's eyes glowed with blue fire. The horned dog smelled fresh blood and attacked the body. The second watchman decided to check why his comrade had not returned for so long, although the dogs had long since fallen silent. He stopped, amazed by the terrible picture that appeared before his eyes, and did not hear Arthur attack him from behind. He jumped on the man's back, covered his mouth, and stabbed him in the neck. As the boy expected, The struggle in this body was much harder and more tiring. He needed to finish everything quickly while the two slavers were sleeping. The dogs made a noise and the cart shook. The two remaining bandits woke up and went to check what was happening. They went in different directions to check the perimeter. One of the robbers received a blow, from which he bent over and lost his voice, and Arthur inflicted a mortal wound on him. The third one was finished, but he was wrong. The third bandit was able to warn his last comrade that the boy who attacked them was a magician. He was very happy about this find. Energy enveloped his hands. He did not want to kill the boy, because a magician could be sold for even more money than an elf. He attacked Arthur with wishes that the boy would not die. When hit by a strong discharge of energy, the boy flew to the side, which made the slave trader very happy. But he didn't have to laugh for long. A lump of earth flew into his face. The bandit thought about it. Things were getting serious. The boy did not lose consciousness. At the same instant, a knife flew at him in a cloud of energy, which the bandit caught with his hand. This made Arthur very angry. He faced a strong opponent. The bandit threw the knife back at Arthur, and then he closed the distance and gave the boy a strong kick. Arthur fell to the ground. The slave trader stretched out his hands to lift and bind such a wonderful source of income. He lifted the boy by the leg. He was too weak and could not do anything. Arthur thought that mana condensation like a blade behaved like wind magic in this world. This means that fire magic must also work. He twisted and grabbed the bandit by the arm with burning hands. The bandit is hesitant to let go of the burning boy from his hands, but then there was an explosion of deafening force. The bandit grabbed his burnt hand and promised that he would finish the boy off. Arthur had already grabbed the knife that was lying nearby and struck the robber's throat. The last wounded bandit begged for his life. Arthur was sure that the little girl asked the bandits for the same thing. In the van, the little elf was crying bitterly. She was tied up and very scared. Arthur smiled at her, extended his hand and said that the danger was over and she would soon return home. The girl silently looked at her savior. After a while, the girl looked at her savior with admiring eyes. Arthur led her out of the bandit camp into the forest, wished her luck and got ready to go his own way. But the girl clung to him tightly. She was scared, and how could he leave such a little girl alone in the forest? Arthur needed to go home urgently. Bad guys won't come after her. Besides, don't the elves feel safe in this forest? The girl burst into tears and replied that animals are only afraid of adults, and her parents told her that hounds and tree golems eat children. Arthur grabbed his head from such tales. He tried to ask the girl how long it would take to take her home, but she didn't know. Then he ordered the girl not to move, and he himself walked towards the bandits' camp. He needed to gather all the supplies, although he hoped the trip would be short. He collected everything he could for the upcoming journey. No one knew how long this trip would take, and he had to think about returning. They could not take the cart. It was broken. He cut the rope and released the hounds into the forest, and he really hoped that the elves had the opportunity to return him to the human kingdom. The girl was sitting in a clearing and playing with a butterfly. Arthur found clothes in the cart and decided that they belonged to the girl. It will get cold soon. She needs to put on a raincoat. It's time to take the elf home. As they walked in the direction the girl pointed, Arthur learned more about her. Her head was Tessia Aerolith. They met. Tessia asked how Arthur ended up in this place. During breaks, when you didn't have to protect yourself from animals, Arthur told her that he had been separated from his parents. He came from the human kingdom. The elf was wondering if it was true that all human men are perverts and have several wives. Arthur denied it and asked who told her that. Tessia replied that her grandfather. Arthur said that only some nobles have several wives. He asked her how her life was going in Elanor. Tessia said she has fun with her caregivers and grandpa because her mom and dad are busy, and as soon as she awakens, she will be given a mentor. At a rest stop, they roasted a rabbit that Arthur had caught over a fire. Tessia was not very happy about this food. She asked if those bad guys would pursue her. Arthur explained to her that they were in big trouble and had no time for her. She will never see them again. The girl thanked the boy from the bottom of her heart. They made a fire again and set up a tent. Arthur said that Tessia should rest, and he would guard her outside. He looked at the starry sky. The boy wanted to use this time to find out what Sylvia left him, but he was interrupted by Tessia. She suggested that Arthur go to bed together because he also needed rest, but there were no bad guys and no one to protect them from. Tessia continued that the animals would definitely attack Arthur if they saw that he was a child. Therefore, she suggests guarding the tent from the inside for everyone's safety. Arthur agreed and climbed into the tent. Tessia grabbed Arthur's knee tightly and calmly fell asleep. Arthur did not sleep and guarded Tessia Aerolith's sleep. The next morning, they continued their journey. What made it unbearable was the excruciating pain emanating from Arthur's mana core. They were unpredictable, and they could overtake the boy at any time of the day or night. In order not to frighten Tessia, Arthur did not tell her anything about his condition. Forest hounds often met them on the way, and Arthur fought with them. Days passed, and Tessia began to recognize more and more familiar surroundings. As for Arthur, despite strengthening his body with mana, the pain continued to increase, and it became increasingly difficult to hide it from the worried girl. Tessia asked if she could call her companion Art, as his family did. Arthur was delighted if Tessia Aerolith would call a simple village boy that. Finally, they came to the road that led to Tessia's house. She entered the green portal and extended her hand to Arthur, calling him to follow her. Arthur flew out of the teleport and fell. He always hated teleporters. Tessia said they came home. Arthur saw the magnificent capital of the kingdom of the elves. Luxurious squares and fountains, a lot of greenery. It was very beautiful. The passing elves looked attentively at the travelers. A boy and a girl stopped in the square. Bright streaks of light flew from the sky, twisting in spirals. They reached the ground in front of the children. Tessia covered Arthur with herself, and he grabbed the knife to protect her. In front of them stood the elves who welcomed the return of the princess of the kingdom. Arthur couldn't believe that he had saved the princess. He was shocked. The guard got down on one knee and said that they arrived as soon as they noticed that the royal portal had been used. The king and queen were already hurrying from the carriage to their dear daughter. Elduin and Muriel Aerolith were very excited about the joyful event. Another elderly elf stepped out of the carriage. It was Virion Aerolith. His name was noted in every history book. The former king of Elanor, who waged the last war against the people. He smiled at his found granddaughter. Tessia ran to her mom and dad. The family embraced the girl. The whole family was assembled. Arthur wondered if his mom and dad would react the same way when he came home. The king bowed to Arthur and thanked him both as a king and as a father. He invited Arthur to his house. There Arthur could rest and tell them what had happened. His tone was soft, but his eyes showed that this was not a suggestion, but an order. Arthur had no choice but to accept this invitation. Tessia grabbed Arthur's hand and dragged him with her. She wanted to show him a lot. Arthur was excited to see the luxurious castle, but what he saw was not at all to his taste. It was reminiscent of cheesy novels. The tree castle was too elaborate. Tessia led Arthur inside. The castle was bright and spacious. The queen ordered the maids to take the boy to his room so that he could rest. But Arthur first wanted to tell the king what happened in the forest. The entire elven royal family gathered at the table to listen to Arthur's story. He introduced himself. His name is Arthur Laven. He is from a town in the kingdom of Sapin. It is a great honor for him to be in the royal family. Arthur told them about his journey, starting with a vague tale of being separated from his family before his encounter with the bandits. It was not a lie, but a half-truth. Inevitably, as the story progressed, and he encountered Tessia, the atmosphere in the room changed. When the king heard about the slave traders, he was furious. He should have guessed because these were people. Arthur noted that being a slaver is a profession, not a race. Tessia's grandfather stopped the guards, who drew their swords in response to the boy's impudent remark, and asked if Arthur saw the slave traders take his granddaughter. Then what did Arthur do as a child? Did you negotiate with them? Did you beg them for mercy? Arthur replied that although he was a child, he was a magician. He simply destroyed the bandits and saved the granddaughter of Elder Virion. One of the guards could not stand the fact that the boy was lying so brazenly in front of the king and wanted to rush at him with a weapon. But Virion stopped him with a burning gaze. Arthur stood up and said that regardless of whether they believed him or not, Tessia returned home safe and sound. And all he wants is to return home to his dad and mom. Tessia was very upset when she heard that Art was leaving. Arthur replied that he knew the history and that a person should not stay in the Elven Kingdom for long. Plus, he needs to make sure his family is okay and that they know he's alive too. The king thought about it. Despite the past of 2 kingdoms, this boy saved his daughter and brought her home. He deserves a worthy reward. The portal connected to the Sapin Kingdom is accessible once every 7 years during the summit conference between the 3 races. There are still 5 years before it opens. However, a group of guards can be sent to escort Arthur home. The king would like to extend his hospitality, but too many of his subjects still resent people because of the war. The escort will be ready for tomorrow morning, but for now, let Arthur have a good rest. In his room, the first thing Arthur did was get into the shower and bathe. When he got out of the shower, he felt sick again. The pain was getting worse. He sat in the living room and clutched in his hand the egg that Sylvia had left for him. He did not know what to do, and regretted that Sylvia could not help him. There was a knock on the door. Arthur opened it and saw an angry Tessia standing in the doorway. She screamed that she didn't want Arthur to leave so quickly, and he didn't speak so coldly to her family. Arthur replied that he was not cold, but polite to royalty. And why didn't Tessia tell him who she was? The girl replied that Art became her first friend, and she did not want him to leave. Then Arthur laughed and asked the whiny princess to show him the castle. Tessia took him to her favorite place in the castle. It was a greenhouse that was lit up with glowing bugs, and if Art stays here until spring, he will see the flowers bloom. Tessia picked up the beetles and showed Art how beautiful they were. She threw the glowing ball to the boy. Suddenly Arthur heard a strange sound and intercepted a knife flying towards Tessia. He grabbed this knife and attacked the enemy, who approached them from behind. He blocked someone's hand. Elder Varian looked at him. Arthur screamed why the hell his grandfather almost killed his own granddaughter. The grandfather replied that the toy that the boy holds in his hand is not capable of killing someone. Arthur looked at the knife and realized that the mischievous grandfather was right. Varian said with satisfaction that the boy has excellent reactions and instincts. He caught his little gift and used it against Varian himself. The boy's mana usage is mediocre, but he managed to kill several bandits. Arthur thought that something was clearly wrong with his grandfather. Tessia demanded that the child stop teasing Art. Varian replied that he was not teasing. He hadn't seen anything interesting for a long time. He tossed a small sword on his hand and invited Arthur to show what he could do. Arthur grabbed the sword and raised it high. With all his appearance, he expressed his determination to fight. He attacked the sitting Varian and stabbed him in the neck. This blow did not cause the slightest damage to Varian. Arthur continued to attack and hit him in the stomach with his sword. The elder dodged the blow and Arthur's sword slipped past. Varian hit the boy with his fist, but Arthur blocked his blow with his sword. The enemy was very strong, and the boy had difficulty blocking him. With the next blow, Varian knocked the sword out of Arthur's hands, and the boy was left unarmed. He jumped high and caught his sword in the air. Now he could fight again. He moved towards the elder, delivering cutting blows at every step. But Varian deftly retreated. Even with mana and minimal movement, Arthur could not keep up with Varian. With an elusive movement, the elf found himself behind the boy. Arthur somersaulted in the air. He flew at the elder from above. I caught the sword with my hand. He turned around very quickly and hit his grandfather on the forehead. Got it! The sword flew away and stuck into the ground. Arthur flew away and also almost stuck into the same ground. Tessia came running to see if her priceless friend was alive. The grandfather had a large abrasion on his forehead. To think that this kid was able to stab him. Grandfather was in awe. Tessia said that Grandpa needs to be gentle with Art. The grandfather replied that if he had been softer, the boy would have killed him. Arthur was honored to hear Varian think so highly of him. Then Varian invited Arthur to become his student. Arthur doesn't understand, is this being said seriously? He is a human. Are people even allowed to stay in this kingdom? Tessia covered the abrasion on her grandfather's forehead with a plaster, and he continued to say that no one would touch Arthur while he was under his care. The boy is now better than some adults, but Varian can teach him what even the best magicians of Seipan cannot. Arthur replied that he could not talk about such things when his parents did not know where their son was and thought that he was dead. Varian said that if there was a way to find out how his parents were doing and communicate with them, would that be enough? Then the grandfather sent Tessia to bed and told the boy that he felt that he had pain in the area of the mana core, and they are getting stronger. Arthur was surprised. How does Varian know this? The grandfather asked the boy if he knew what the will of the beast was. Arthur had never heard of such a thing before, but he remembered how Sylvia had struck him to the core. Varian was sure that Arthur had already encountered mana beasts. A beast strong enough, Class A or higher, gains the ability to transfer its will, or inherent ability, once to either a descendant or a person to whom it is attached. At this stage, the power that resides in Arthur is doing more harm than good. Arthur asked if Varian himself had the will of the beast. He confirmed this and said that he was the one who is called the Tamer of Animals. This is the title that can be obtained when you completely defeat the monstrous beast within yourself. Varian understood how important it was for Arthur to return home, but doing so now was risky. The power of his beast will is too strong for the boy's body. If he doesn't learn to control it, the power he has gained will destroy his body from the inside. The next day, when Arthur went out into the castle courtyard, he heard the Elf King arguing with Varian. Elduin said that man has no place in the kingdom of the elves. His wife supported her husband. They will always be grateful to the boy for saving Tessia, but allowing the man to stay goes against all traditions. The gloomy Varian replied that he liked the boy and would do as he wanted. The elder settled all disputes. Arthur will be under his direct supervision, and Alduin must make sure everyone in the kingdom knows this. Arthur thought that Varian could be trusted. He walked up to the carriage and they drove off. Tessia also went with them. In the carriage, Arthur asked his grandfather how long they should go. Varian did not expect his companion to be so spontaneous. Tessia got up early to get ready for the trip, so she fell asleep in the carriage. Varian told the boy that Tessia grew up alone. She was a princess and was constantly hurt by adults and even children who pretended to be her friends. She became cold and withdrawn, building a wall around herself. She laughed more in the short time she spent with Arthur than she had in the last few years. Virion thanked Arthur for this. Their trip soon ended and they arrived at a rural house. Arthur wondered who this mysterious friend of Virion was, who had forced the former king to come to this countryside. Virion behaved strangely. He began kicking the door and yelling for the old witch to come out and open the door for them. The door opened, and an old elf appeared on the threshold, who shouted indignantly that she could hear everything perfectly. Virion introduced Arthur to his old friend, Rinia Darkasan. She is a very special deviant and can help the boy. Rinia invited everyone into the house. Arthur thought that if Rinia was a deviant, then she had the same abilities as his mother. Their magic falls under the categories of the 4 main elements. I wonder how it can help him. The boy did not waste time, and immediately asked if it was true that Rinia's magic would allow him to contact his parents. That's what his grandfather told him. Rinia laughed and turned to Virion with the words that he obviously really liked the boy, if he allowed himself to be called grandfather. She explained to Arthur that she was a diviner, and that this kind of magic varied from mage to mage, but she was quite capable. There is little that can be hidden from her. For example, she knows that he is special, so special that there is some part of his life that even she cannot see. To see her parents, Rinia gave Arthur a basin of water and told him to lean forward and look into the water. He needed to focus on the image of his parents as clearly and in detail as possible. When he sees them in the water, he can talk to them. Arthur leaned over the water. He remembered Mom and Dad and asked them to be alive. But then Arthur's eyes widened at what he saw. He saw his mother putting the cooked food on the table. Father is happy that Alice has prepared beef stew. Mom remembers that this was Art's favorite dish. And tears fall from her eyes. She sadly sits down on a chair and strokes her belly. And suddenly Arthur's voice is heard in their heads. He says that they are of course surprised to hear him. Now he wants them to know their son is alive and safe. The parents listen to their son and remember what happened after his disappearance. Like Riella Alice, Art continued to say that he barely survived the fall from the cliff, and now he is in the kingdom of the elves. It was very difficult for him, but he is glad that his parents are okay. He hopes that they do not blame each other, and that if he returned to the past, he would do the same as he did then. He would really like to go to them, but now it is difficult. It seems he has some kind of illness that needs to be cured. He's not sure when he'll next be able to contact them. There is a magician here, a deviant like his mother, and she allows them to hear her son's voice. Dad needs to know that his son continues to practice magic and fight while he is healing. Until they meet, let Dad take care of Mom and child. Ray and Alice listened to this message from their son and rushed into each other's arms. Their joy knew no bounds. Arthur looked at his joyful parents hugging, and tears streamed from his eyes straight into the water. He raised his head, determination in his eyes. He was ready to follow Virion. They returned to the castle. They were met on the threshold by the king and queen. The king blocked Arthur's path with his hand. The boy did not know what to expect and froze. Alduin sheepishly said that his years as king had made him a little old-fashioned and stubborn. The queen gently placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and continued that her husband was trying to say that they were sorry for what happened. Histart will accept their apology and considers this place his home. Alduin wanted to greet his daughter's savior and his father's first student properly. They shook hands, and Arthur thanked the king for his generosity. Tessia intervened and said that her father should let her and Arthur play outside. She wants to show the boy the city. Arthur was waiting for Tessia on the steps of the castle, and she came out in a new outfit, all pink and beautiful. They walked through the streets of the elven city. One of the passers-by roughly pushed Arthur, and he shouted that now he had human germs on him. The elf boy pointed his finger at him and shouted that it was really just because the elder favored the man that he thought he belonged here. The rest of the children support this speech. The boy turned to Tessia. He respected her kindness, but being with such a commoner was below her level. He, Ferret Ivsar, is the second to escort her to the castle. Arthur grinned skeptically and suddenly shouted loudly, "Oh, is it really Ferret Ivsar himself?" He deliberately distorted the boy's name. At first he was taken in and flattered, and said that it was not surprising that even people had heard about his genius, although he was so young. But then he realized that Arthur was mocking him. Arthur bowed deeply, and replied that he had no idea that he was next to such a genius. Tessia held back her laughter. And now it's time for Arthur and Tessia to go about their business. They walked away from the boy, but he shouted for Arthur to stop. Ferret understood his sarcasm perfectly. Art was glad that the kid was not as stupid as he thought. Ferret wasted no time challenging Arthur to a duel. Tessia stepped forward and asked how dare Ferret challenge Elder Virion's disciple to a duel. He must know his place despite the fact that his blood is noble. Ferret apologized to the princess, but his father taught him not to allow anyone to trample on his honor. A person must either accept the challenge or give up. Arthur would never have thought that things were so serious with the elves, and Ferret asked Tessia to be the judge in the upcoming duel. Tessia had no choice but to announce the start of the fight. Ferret was armed with a jelly and prepared for a fight. While he was showing off, Arthur quickly closed the distance between them. His fist slammed into his opponent's cheekbone. Ferret fell to the ground. This came as a complete surprise to the audience. Tessia was sure that this was how it would all end. She grabbed Art's hand and they ran from the battlefield. Arthur liked the little princess more and more. They walked around the city and saw the sights. Tessia knew Art was nervous about starting training with her grandfather. Virion looked at his student meticulously. He didn't know how he had been taught until now, but the elder's lessons would not be easy. Even ignoring the pain of the mana core, the assimilation process used by beast tamers was often compared to immersing a body in boiling resin. But if he sticks it out, the rewards will be enormous. Is the brat ready for this? Arthur was excited. He's come a long way to get to where he is now. Training, meeting with parents, he's excited about it all. And he can't wait to see what the future holds for him.